Sorry, I think I messed something up. Give me just 1 sec. Oh, no, we're good. All right, let's get started. I thought my microphone wasn't plugged in. Looks like it is. So, the first thing we're going to do today is we are going to open up Photoshop. I'm going to turn off these images that pop up every time I open up Photoshop. These are actually images from when I studied abroad. This is Italy. My favorite thing about this image, I actually used this for a demonstration last time. So I'm standing in a window at a museum in Tuscany, and I watched this little kid down here kick his soccer ball, and you can barely see it. It landed in the windowsill. I could hear him yelling at his mom that his soccer ball was stuck in the windowsill. That was kind of one of my favorite parts of the day, was watching him try to figure out how to get that. But here it is, soccer ball. I know. It just got stuck there. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is the first thing you're going to have to do for the homework assignment, well, actually, let's just talk about the homework assignment real quick. So what you're going to be doing today during lab is you're going to create both an urban and a rural scene, okay? You're going to create 2 scenes, and in each scene, you're going to be required to place a person in that scene and make it look as seamless as possible, okay? So you want to, we're going to look at how to analyze a scene today, look at the shadows, the lighting, and how we can successfully place that person in there and actually make it look real. Our end result for all of these that we do is that if we look at it, that we can't tell that it's photoshopped, okay? So that's the goal. And once you guys do peer reviews, you'll probably hear from your fellow peers whether or not they think that it looks real or not, or if there's certain things that make it look really real, or maybe there's certain things that add to it not looking real. So I'm sure you'll hear about that a little bit later. So the first thing that we're going to do, or that you'll need to do when starting this, is you'll need to find some scenes, okay? You can go on to Canvas, and I've uploaded about 5 or 6 scenes, a couple city scenes, a couple rural scenes out in like Yosemite. So you can pick from those if you'd like, or you can find your own scene. What you'll need to do is you'll need to find, or one of the important aspects of the scene that you find is that it has no people in it, okay? Because I want to be able to easily identify the people that you place inside your scene, or at least very little people, okay? So if we go to Canvas real quick, and you go to Files, and you go to Support Files, and click on Collage Background Images, you'll see a variety of scenes that you can use. So like this first one is a European scene. You can tell there's one guy in the background, but I'm guessing you're not going to put a guy as tiny as he is way back in the background, okay? Let's see, what else did I upload? We have a scene from, does anyone recognize where this maybe is? This is semi-local. Not San Francisco. Santa Cruz. Yep. It is Santa Cruz. What else do we got here? This is San Francisco. And we have a couple rural scenes. We have Yosemite, more Yosemite, and then another Yosemite picture. Okay, so you'll have to choose one rural and one city scene. You don't have to pick these. You can go on to Creative Commons if you want, and you can find your own scene if you'd like, okay? So let's go ahead and I'll just pick one of these and we will open it up. And let's look at, the first thing I want to look at is how we can start to kind of analyze our scene and some things to look for prior to picking some people that we're going to place in the scene, okay? I already have these downloaded, so let me just find those real quick. Let's do Santa Cruz. Okay, so let me blow this up a little bit. So when we look at this photo, what are some things that are probably pretty important to understanding prior to picking some people? Light, okay. Light, and light ultimately affects shadows, right. So the first thing that I would always do prior to picking some people is to understand the shadows, okay? So if we look at this scene, let me just unlock a couple of these things. If we look at this scene, we can start to analyze it a little bit, okay? So let me grab a line tool. Let me make the color red, just so you guys can see some of the lines that I'm drawing. Okay, so if we look at this scene, we can see a couple different things, all right? The first question I'm going to ask myself is, where is the sun? Okay, and you know, it's fairly obvious that we can probably figure out where the sun is. We can look at the shadows. If we look at the shadow line right here, we have one shadow line here. Excuse me. And we have a shadow down here, okay? So we can start to get an understanding of where the sun is and in about what time of the day it is. So if we look at our angle of our shadow on our roof, it's not, if the shadow is way down here, we would have a much higher sun. So the sun is likely on this side, or it is on this side of the scene, and it's on the lower or towards the end of the day. Okay, so or probably middle to the end of the day. All right, and if we look at some of the shadows of the trees and the other objects in the scene, we can get a larger sense of that. If you look at the shadow behind the dumpster, you can see that it's a pretty long shadow. Okay, so the sun is probably a little bit more on the later side of the day. If the shadow is just on the right in maybe this, oops, wrong tool. If the shadow was more of in this direction right here, and you didn't see it over here, you would know it's probably at like noon or something like that. All right, so we get a sense of where some of those shadows are in the scene. All right, so if you're picking a person to place in the scene, ideally, how would you like the shadow to look? You're going to want the shadow to be on the same side as what you see the buildings and the other objects. So you're going to want some shadows on the left side of their body. All right. So as we look for people, we're going to want to make sure that we find the right person. That's usually the first dead giveaway of a scene being fabricated, is when the shadows aren't correct. Okay. The other thing that we have to look at, and I usually try to draw a little reference line, is where the horizon is. Okay. The horizon line usually affects about where the placement of the people's eyes are in the scene. So if I look at this particular scene, it's pretty obvious because we have ocean in the background and we can see where that horizon is. Okay, so I can draw a line about right there. Let me move it up just a little bit. Okay, so our horizon is about right there. Okay. So that gives us a little bit of an idea of where our people would be placed. Okay, so in other scenes it may not be so apparent. When you're looking at a scene from Yosemite, you're going to have a lot of mountains in the background. You'll have to process where you think that horizon is a little bit differently. All right, so let's find some people. I'm going to leave those lines there for now. All right, we'll probably end up hiding them in just a second. But let's find some people that would work pretty well for this. And ideally, yes, if you use the people that you created last class, that'll work really well. If you don't like those people or they don't work well for these scenes, you guys can find other ones if you want. You can go on Google, you could find them. You can also go to the other course website. So if you go to the digital tool site, he actually has a little place where you can find them, where other students have uploaded their people that they've masked already. So if you go over to, you're going to want to log in. All right, so if you go over to resources, you can go over to Collage Images. All right, if you go to Collage Images, you'll see a bunch of things that other students have created in the past for this class. Okay, so you can go to people, you can go to animals, and you can find additional objects or people to place in your scene if the ones that you guys already did don't work. Okay, so it's pretty self-explanatory how that works. You click on people, you have male and female, you have silhouettes. Feel free to browse those and use those if you wish. Okay, I'm going to look at ones that I've already downloaded. Okay, so I'm going to go open up my Explorer. Let's see what I have already on file. So we have people. Let's see what we got. I'm going to go to View, Extra Large Icons. So we have a gal, we have a guy running, we have a girl walking. Actually, this right here would probably be pretty good. Okay, I'm looking at this image, I can see that there's a shadow on the left side of her body. She's casting a shadow on his body, and there's the same shadow on the left side. So I think that would work pretty well. If you ever see something that is opposite, that's okay. You can always bring your image inside and you can just mirror it, okay? It'll still look correct. All right, I'll show you how to do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna drag this onto my scene. Where did I go? Okay, so I'm gonna drag this person onto my scene. All right, there they are. So right now I have not officially placed them yet. Before I actually hit the check mark and place them into the scene, I'm gonna go ahead and size them appropriately, okay? So I'm gonna move them around and figure out what's the best place to put these people, all right? I like to think rule of thirds. It's not always the right thing, but I usually put them on either this side of my scene or I put them on this side of the scene. All right, so usually it's pretty easy to identify when that person is either under scale or either too small or too large. The key is usually to place the eyes of the taller person on the horizon line. In this case, we have a guy and a girl. Obviously, the guy's a little bit taller than her. If it's vice versa, then you would place the horizon line on the eyes of the female, okay? Whatever works is fine. So you'll notice that if I place them right here in the foreground of the scene, I can place the person's eyes on the horizon line, and that looks like about the right scale. But if I just move them, over here towards the back, they look like they're 20 feet tall, okay? So we know that would be incorrect. So let's say I wanted to actually place them over here. I would simply hold down Shift on my keyboard. Shift will keep that object in proportion as I make it smaller, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and put his eyes on that horizon line, and they will then, look to be the appropriate scale for that scene, okay? I can continue to move them back if I want to, make them even smaller, and they would still look to be the right size for the scene, okay? Ideally, I would place them towards the front of your scene so that I can see the detail and what it is that you're doing. Don't go and place them way back here and say that's my scene that I created, okay? So ideally they're gonna be towards the the front of what you're working on, all right? So I'm gonna go ahead and place them right here. I'm going to adjust him appropriately, all right? And I'm going to click on the check mark to place him in the scene, okay? So I know he's in the right spot. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the different shapes that I had just created so that I'm not distracted by them. So now that these people are placed in the scene, yes, they look like the right scale. They look, the scene looks pretty, looks pretty good. It's actually not too far off of what we actually want. But what's the first thing that we kind of notice about where we are now? Anybody?
No shadow.
Yeah, there's no shadow. Their feet, the person doesn't really look planted to the ground, okay? They look like they're kind of floating on the pavement that they're on. So the next step that we're gonna do is to add the shadow, all right? So everyone created silhouettes of their images last class, so you should have them for the people. If you download them from the other course website, you will likely find the shadow for them, or you can create a new one if you need to, if you download it from somewhere else, okay? So I already have that in my arsenal. So you could drag it into your scene, or you could go to File, Place, and I could place that person in my scene. So I'm gonna go to People, People Walking Gray. So I'm gonna go ahead and place them in. Well, that's not People Walking Gray. That's Person Walking Gray. Let's see, File, Place. Let me just look at these as icons. People Walking Gray. So I'm going to go ahead and hit place. The next thing that I want to do after I place the silhouette in is to size it appropriately. So I'm going to go ahead and make it smaller so that it's the same size as the people that I just placed. Okay, doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to end up tweaking it anyways, but get it pretty darn close. Okay, that'll work. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the check mark, and I now have a shadow for my scene. All right. So what I'm going to do from here is I need to alter the shadow so that it's on the ground, and I want that shadow to match the other shadows in the scene, okay? So I'm going to do Control T. Control T is the shortcut for the transform tool, okay? There's a few tools you could actually use to do this. You could use the skew tool, all right? You can also use the transform tool. I use the transform tool because it's ultimately scale, skew, and one other tool, I forget what it is, all kind of combined in one. You can do them all. All the functions of those three tools you can do with the transform tool. Okay, so that's Control T. And what that will allow me to do is a few things. Scale, so I can make the object smaller or larger. If I hold down the Control button, notice that my arrow or my pointer becomes white. All right. If I click on one of the little stretchers at the outer perimeter of the box, I can actually grab them and start to skew where that image falls. Okay. So right now I'm grabbing the middle one so I can kind of get the general placement correct. But from there, after I kind of get the basics of that, I can start to grab the other edges, and you're probably going to want to zoom, and start to align the shadows to the people. Okay, so I'm moving this edge now. I'm going to kind of get it so that the feet align with the feet of the correct people. Okay.
How do you keep a certain grippers fixed and the others mobile?
Say that a little bit louder.
Are you hitting a key while you're moving?
I'm holding down Control. So when I'm holding down Control on the keyboard, that will allow I'll continue to skew and transform the image. Okay. So if I just grab one of these little little toggles, it will just make the image smaller or larger. Okay. But by holding down Control, you'll notice that your arrow turns to white, and I can actually start to transform all of those different points. Okay. So from here, I'm going to kind of skew it properly. Give me just a second while I kind of eyeball this to look the way that I want to. So it's a little bit later in the day. Okay, so I'm going to kind of stretch this appropriately. I'm going to kind of get a little bit of a perspective on that shadow. It's probably a little bit off. It actually probably wants to be over here. It's probably going to be about like that. Okay, so you guys will probably spend a little bit more time getting it to be perfect. Yes.
How do you do it if it is sun exactly at like 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock?
So if it's either totally on one side, well, you're just going to have to transform it until you kind of get the shape that you want. Okay, so it's kind of hard to. If I go back here, I'll go ahead and place it just one more. I'll do it on the next scene. Okay, I'll show you. I'll kind of create a different scenario. Okay, so you may have to kind of widen it a little bit. Again, holding down Control, you can make it a little wider if you need to, make it a little narrower. Just start to play with the proportions of that shadow until it matches the shadows, the rest of the shadows in the scene. Okay, so I think this is pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and say that's okay. All right, I'm going to say those are my shadows, and I'm going to hit the check mark. All right, so from there, I'm going to move the shadow layer. You'll notice that the shadows right now are is actually in front of the people. I'm going to move that shadow layer below the people, okay, so that the people's feet are actually on top of the shadow. Okay. I think the shadow is actually still a little too small. Sorry. I think it would actually kind of be going off the scene just a little bit. Okay? All right. I'll go ahead and settle with that. Yeah, I think that looks a little better. Okay? So that will be our shadow for our person. So if we continue to look at this, what else do we notice about it that still looks a little fake? A few more things come to mind for me. Anybody notice them?
The shadows are a little the wrong color.
Yeah, absolutely. The shadows are definitely the wrong color. So if we look at the shadow from the tree over here, the shadow over here is definitely not the right color. And you will rarely find the perfect shadow. Your shadow that you import from your files is rarely going to be exactly correct from the scene. Okay? So the next thing I'm going to do with the shadow is I'm going to add a multiply layer, or I'm sorry, a multiply blending mode to it. Okay, what that will do is it'll allow it to be transparent so that I can see the scene behind it, so that it's not just placing a gray silhouette on the ground, but it actually becomes a transparent shadow, okay, like you would see in real life. All right, so we're getting a little bit closer to obtaining this correct shadow. But if I look at the two, this is still pretty gray, and this actually kind of has somewhat of a blue hue to it, or a little bit of a blue tint. So we can actually still go a step further in creating that, or getting that a little bit closer, okay? So what I'll then do is I'm going to add an adjustment layer. I'm going to go up to Layer, Adjustment Layer, and let's do Color Balance. Yes?
Don't you want to mask it first?
I don't need to mask it yet. Nope, I'm going to show you guys why right now. Okay, so I'm going to go to Color Balance. I'm going to hit OK. And as I apply a little bit of a blue tint to that shadow, notice that it's also adding a blue tint to the rest of the scene. Okay, it's not just applying a blue shadow, or it's not just applying that blue tint to just the shadow. It's applying it to the entire scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that color balance adjustment layer, and I am going to do Control Alt G. Okay, what that does is it applies that adjustment layer to just the layer below. Okay, it won't affect anything else in the scene but the layer below. Okay, so notice that I have my shadow layer here, and I have the color balance above that. And right here, you're going to see that little arrow that says that we're applying that adjustment layer to just the shadow. Okay? And I'd say it looks a lot closer. I could still maybe adjust it just a little bit, maybe give it a little bit more blue.
It's magenta.
Yep, probably a little bit of magenta. Yep, just a little bit. Okay? I'd say that looks a lot closer. Okay? Now, you'll run into things like, okay, we have a cone. Okay, you could probably strategically place it so that it doesn't do that, but you could also, you could actually alter the shadow. I'm going to do it here in a few minutes, actually in a different scene. I'll show you how to kind of adapt for a situation like that. Okay, so just a couple more things before we move on. What are a few more adjustments that we might make to our scene to make it just make a little bit more real? Okay, we're already pretty close. We've gotten quite a few steps. I'd say it looks pretty real. If you showed this to a lot of people, they wouldn't be able to tell that it was Photoshop. Anything else you notice?
I forget which tool it is, or they may both exist. Blur or smudge.
To what?
For the edges of it, because it looks.
Okay,
shadow.
great point. So he's saying the edges of the shadow are a little bit, they're a little bit crisp. Okay, so it doesn't quite match the edges of the shadow that you see over here, and that's a great point. Yes, we could fix that. How would I do that? I'm going to click on my, my shadow layer. I'm going to add a layer mask to it. Okay, like so. And then I'm going to go over, remember that what color for our pen tool will allow us to kind of subtract from our shadow? Anybody remember that? So with that layer mask selected, I'm going to go over to my pen tool or my brush tool. All right. With, let's see, am I on the right one? Give me just a second.
You have to be in black.
Okay, perfect. Yes, thank you. So black will remove from our from whatever it is that we're masking. White will add it back. Okay. So the reason why when I was clicking earlier is because there's nothing else in the scene. But right now I have a mask applied to the edge of my shadow. So if I go up to my pen, I'm going to make the size of my tool a little bit bigger. Okay, maybe about that size, and I'm going to click on one of the tools that allows me to get a little bit of a gradient. Okay, so I'm going to click on the soft round brush, and then what I'll do is I'm going to start to just feather the edge of that shadow. Okay, let me make this just a little bit smaller. It might take a few little tries until you get it correct. Okay, and see, I can go along here and I can start to
Turn your opacity down and it won't be as strong either.
Yep, that is true. So I can go over to my opacity. I'm going to turn that down for that mask. Oh, you're talking about this opacity right here? Yeah, so I'm going to bring that down just a little bit. And then from there, I can start to just kind of blend the edge of that shadow. That might take a little bit of time, and you kind of have to play with it a little bit just to get the right setting, or get it to, you know, start working correctly, okay, or get it to look the way that you want. So you might mess around with the hardness a little bit. You might just try bringing that up and down until you get the, you know, just the right effect, okay. You can also adjust the size of the brush, and you can adjust the brush head, okay. I'm not going to do it to the entire one because I don't want you guys to have to watch me do that for 10 minutes, but that will ultimately allow that shadow to look a little bit more realistic, okay. You can see now that when I zoom back that it actually has a little bit softer of an edge, okay. Everyone see how that works? Good. Okay, the last thing that I might do to this scene to make it just to look a little bit real, or a little bit more real, is I'd recommend using the dodge and burn tool, okay? So when you bring the people in, the first thing that I ask myself is, how do the colors of the people that I bring in, their clothes, and kind of the overall saturation of the image, how does that correspond with the saturation of the background? You want it to look like the same camera took both images. But more often than not, you know, one camera is better quality or was using different settings than the other. Luckily for this scene, I'd say it's pretty good, but what you might try is, I'm going to go to my people layer, and I am going to, if I look up the background, I'd say it's maybe a little bit dull. I'd say my people are just a little bit oversaturated. So if I go over to layer and I go to new adjustment layer, I'm going to go to hue and saturation, hit OK, and I'm going to reduce that saturation just a little bit, maybe about -10, and that will start to make it look a little bit more like the rest of the image, okay? So I think that looks good. I'm going to do Control-Alt-G, and that will apply that saturation adjustment to just those people, all right? And lastly, if the shadows on the people are a little bit too soft or too dark, you can use your dodge and burn tool to do that as well. So if I wanted to apply a dodge and burn to my people, I would apply what kind of layer? Anybody? So if I go up to layer and I go to new, I'm not going to use an adjustment layer, all right? I'm just going to add just a normal layer, all right? And then I'm going to change the mode to what? Correct, overlay. Okay, so I'm going to click on overlay, and then I'm going to click on the button that says fill with overlay neutral color, and I'm going to hit OK. All right, and I'm going to bring that just below hue and saturation. All right, notice that I also have the arrow on that, so that's applying to just the people below. And then from there, I can zoom in, and I can use my my burn tool. So maybe I go to burn, and I could start to kind of darken up the edges of that person if I want to. I'd say they were probably already, you know, pretty good. I don't think they were too far off. But if they need it, and you very much may need it for your scene, you can use the dodge and burn tool to get the overall coloring that you're looking for. Okay? So now if we pull back and we look at this from a little bit further away, they actually look like they're pretty well integrated and rooted into that scene, okay? Yes, I could probably spend another 10 minutes and I could probably, you know, just detail the shadows just a little bit more around their feet and get it and fix the cone, and that would probably, you know, ultimately make it look about 100%. Okay, so any questions about any of those steps? Good? Yes?
How do you make the shadow darker?
So I just added a dodge and burn, okay, and I did the dodge and burn process just to the people, okay. So let's do another one of these. We're going to do 3 scenes today. I'm going to do 2 urban, and I'm going to do 1 rural. All right, so I'm going to open up another city scene, and we'll go ahead and repeat the same process. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and let's open up San Francisco. Let's open up San Francisco because we kind of have an interesting scene in here where we have a really big curb, and I'm going to show you guys how to fix a shadow that maybe is encountering a sloped surface, okay, like a curb. All right, so I'll go through this a little bit faster. I'm going to go to File, Place, find the right person. Actually, before we do that, let's just kind of analyze our scene a little bit. Again, our shadows or our sun is on the right-hand side of our image. It's probably later in the day. We have some pretty dramatic shadows. As we can see, they're all pretty lengthy. Okay, you can see that the shadow edge for this bus stop is all the way out here. It's probably like 6 or 7 o'clock maybe. All right, so that gives us some good clues. Let's unlock our background layer. I can place a line on my horizon. You'll notice that in this scene that the street actually goes a little bit downhill and actually veers off to the left. So we'll have a little bit more difficult of a time determining where that horizon is, okay? You can see the edge of the houses out here, but I would assume that the horizon is actually a little bit below those rooftops, okay? So I can draw that line. I'd say it's probably about right there. You can either draw a line. Another thing that you could do, if you bring your mouse up to your guides, okay, so right here you see these rulers, and if you bring your mouse up to those guides, I can actually just click and I could drag it down, and that will bring a guide onto my screen, okay? So you don't actually have to draw a line if you don't want to. But I can bring that guide about to where I believe the horizon is. I'm going to say it's about right there. All right, it's actually a little bit easier and a little bit more visible to see. Okay, everyone see how I did that? So I just brought my mouse up to my guide, and I clicked down. I'm holding down my mouse, and I could bring that guide to wherever I want in my scene. Okay, I can do the same thing on the left side if I want to. All right, so maybe you're kind of blocking out your scene a little bit. You can use those. They become pretty helpful. All right. Another thing that I didn't talk about for the last scene that's also important to think about is perspective. Okay, think about what the perspective is in the scene. In these rural scenes, they're all one-point perspectives. All right, you can see that you have a street going down to about right here. All right, and you have this sidewalk is going down about right there. We have these street lamps that's coming down to about right there. So we can kind of see that our vanishing point is right about in this area over here. So as you're placing your people, depending on their location in the scene, you may likely have to tweak them a little bit to allow for that perspective to be correct, okay? Because unfortunately, the people that we're masking and we're bringing into our scenes are not always going to be in the exact perspective that you want them to be in, okay? I'll turn off these shapes. Actually, I'm just going to delete the shapes. I don't really need them. Okay, so let's place a person into our scene. I'm going to go to File, Place. Let's find those people. And let's do this gal right here. Okay, so I'm going to click on her. I'm going to click on Place. And from here, I'm going to make her a little bit smaller. Let's find the right area. Maybe she's walking. I'm going to put her about right. Let's put her about right there. All right, so I'm going to make her a little bit smaller. I think she needs to be a little bit smaller than that. Our horizon might be a little bit smaller than what I think. I'm going to choose right there. I think that looks about the right scale. I'd say the horizon line is probably right about in that area. Okay, any questions about how to place the people or objects into our scene? Pretty good?
Where are those people files?
So these are the ones that I created last. Well, I didn't create them last class, but I've created them in the lecture from last class. You can also find additional ones on the Digital Tools website. You can actually probably find the person. Oh, in fact, she's right there. That's her. Okay, so you can find them on the Digital Tools website. Yeah.
If she is where it appears she is, I think you need to make her a little shorter.
Okay, you think she's a little too
Just
tall?
Judging off the bus stops,
Mm-hmm.
makes her a little
Okay,
tall.
let's make her a little bit smaller. I can actually kind of agree with that. About right there. Okay, and when I say the eyes should line up on the horizon line, that's kind of taking into account maybe like a 5'9" to 6 foot human, regardless of whether they're a guy or a girl. So you can help use that as to kind of get the perspective in the right place. So their eyes might actually be a little bit below. If it's in this case, let's say this gal is 5'5" or something like that, her eyes might actually be a few inches below that horizon line. Okay, so we'll say she's correct. All right, she might be a little undersized or a little oversized, not sure, but I'd say that looks pretty good. We like that. All right, so let's go ahead and place the shadow into the scene. We go to File, Place. I will pick her shadow, and let's size it appropriately. Let's make it smaller. Okay, that looks about right. Go ahead and place the shadow into the scene. Okay, and I'm just looking real quick, making sure that her shadows are correct. Her shadows in the shadows on this particular image are actually fairly neutral. So whenever this photograph was probably taken, it wasn't during a time of the day where she has strong shadows on her body. So luckily, actually, I take that back. They're actually on this side of her body. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to click on this person. I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and I'm going to click on Flip Horizontal. Okay, now the shadow, looking really carefully, is actually on the left side of her neck. Okay, so that's a little closer to what we actually want. So I'm going to do the same thing to the shadow. Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. Okay, so we'll say she's crossing the street. She's jaywalking. Don't jaywalk. I've actually had a police officer in Walnut Creek try to give me a jaywalking ticket. I'm like, this is not even a real thing. I didn't get it. Okay, so I'm going to size that shadow. I'm going to go to File, Place, and then from there, again, to transform the shadow, to start to skew it, I'm going to do Control T. All right, Control T. I'm going to hold down Alt. All right, Alt changes. I'm sorry, I'm going to hold down Control, and that will allow me to start to skew or place that shadow on the ground. Okay, I'm going to line up the feet accordingly. All right, so I'm going to get that shadow just below her feet. Her other foot looks like it maybe is kind of lifting off the ground a little bit, so that's probably okay. All right, and I'm going to want to stretch it so that it kind of matches the rest of the shadows in our scene. So I'm going to say it's something about like that. Okay, so we might have to kind of skew it a little bit so that it matches. Okay, let's zoom back out. Let's say that's probably pretty accurate. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and accept that. So I'm going to click on the check mark. All right, but you're going to notice that we're running into a couple problems. You're going to see that we have a curve here that doesn't look correct. Okay, so let's bring the color of the shadow below the person. I'm going to apply a multiply blending mode to that so that the shadow is actually see-through. And what I'm going to do is, first thing, I'm going to right-click on my shadow layer, and I'm going to click on Rasterize. That's going to actually make it a non-image. Okay, it's actually going to make it an editable, piece of art that you can actually edit in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm going to rasterize the layer, and then from there, I'm going to go up to my Lasso Tool. Okay, so this is a new tool that you guys haven't learned yet. All right, I'm going to choose the Polygonal Lasso Tool. The difference between Lasso and Polygonal Lasso is that the regular Lasso Tool kind of works like a pen, to where I could just kind of freehand select a portion of my image, and then I'll have a mask on it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and use the Polygonal Lasso Tool so that I can actually create a straight line. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mask around the part of the shadow above the curb. Okay, so I'm going to place a line right at the edge of the curb, and I'm going to go ahead and select everything around the upper portion of that shadow, and with the shadow layer selected and I'm going to go ahead and grab my move tool. I'm going to go ahead and bring it to the top of my curb. Okay, so I'm going to place it about right there. Okay, and if I need to kind of zoom in, you may have to. You can place the upper portion of that shadow on that curb. Okay, I'm going to do Control D. All right, Control D will deselect. All right, and that will deselect from that portion of the shadow. What's up? How are you? You gonna place it right here? Maybe we'll munch on it. Okay, I know.
There's other.
Brian was telling us the same thing.
Still in the.
Join the Ace Club if you guys are interested.
Ace Club. Yes.
How do you rotate the shadow?
How do you rotate the shadow? Like you actually want to rotate it, like in.
No, I mean, we scale it and.
Okay, so you'll do Control T. Control T is transform. That allows you to scale and skew. Okay, so I'll go back and just do that one more time. I'm just going to reverse it. All right, so this is the shadow after you place it. I'm going to do Control T, hold down Control, and then start to grab the little toggles. Okay, and I'll get it to, I'll start to skew it using the toggles to line up with the other shadows in the scene. Okay, I'm going to adjust the perspective just a little bit. Get the shadow underneath the foot, and that looks about right. Okay, so I'm going to accept that, place. I'm going to place the shadow below the person, apply a multiply layer, and then from there, I'm going to click on my Polygonal Lasso tool. I'm going to lasso at the edge of the curb, select the upper portion of the body. All right, rasterize my shadow layer so that I can actually manipulate it. And then from there, I'll click on my move tool and I'll place that shadow at the upper part of the curb. Okay? When you Control D for deselect, and then from there, what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to use that Polygonal Lasso tool, and I'm going to create a space between the bottom of my shadow and the top. So I'm going to go ahead and connect the dots, like so. All right, so that I get a nice little, you know what? I don't think that looks exactly correct. Let me just backtrack just a sec. It's a little bit off. Here we go. I like that a little bit better. So again, multiply and rasterize. Let's try that one more time. Okay, so Polygonal Lasso. I'm going to select my shadow layer, grab my cut tool or my move tool, and I'm going to place it actually about over here. I think that's, yeah, that should be better. Maybe even over here. Okay? So Control D for deselect. That will turn off our selection. And again, so Polygonal Lasso, I'm going to go ahead and connect the dots over here to fill in the rest of my shadow, like so. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my brush tool. All right, so I'm going to go over to brush, and I'm going to go ahead and fill that in to match the rest of my shadow. Okay, to do that, I'm going to hold down Alt. With my brush tool activated, I'm going to hold down Alt, and notice that I get a little eyedropper. Okay, what that eyedropper allows me to do is it allows me to select a color in the scene to match. Okay, so right now I have only my shadow layer activated, or I have it selected. So the only thing that I can select from is from the objects that are in that layer. So right now the only things that I can eyedrop from is just that shadow. If I wanted to eyedrop, say, the color of the girl's shirt, I would need to click on that layer, and then I could eyedrop from that shirt. If I wanted to eyedrop from the street, I'd need to click on the background layer and select that color. Okay? So I'm going to click on the shadow layer. I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to select the color of that shadow. Notice up here in our color dialog box that we have that color now selected. So with my brush tool, I'm going to go ahead and fill that in just like so, and it's going to match what I just selected. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and do deselect, and that will alter that shadow appropriately. Okay? So a few more things to make this look a little bit better. Let's go ahead and make it look like the rest of our shadows. Okay? Obviously the shadow from the girl is a lot different from the shadows in the background of the scene. Okay, so I'm going to change maybe the opacity just a little bit, maybe about 80. That's getting a little bit closer. Let's get it a little bit softer. About like that, okay? So, and just like we did last time, I'm going to go ahead and apply an adjustment layer. So layer, adjustment layer, I'm going to go over to channel mixer, I'm sorry, color balance, hit OK, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a blue tint to it, maybe a little bit of purple. Okay, and what's the command to apply that color balance to just my shadow? Control Alt G. Okay, so Control Alt G, and that actually, yep, that did it. But I think we're still a little bit off. Let's maybe add a little bit more. Yeah, let's try a little cyan. Yeah, that actually does help. I think it's still a little bit too dark. Let's go to, let's make this like, yeah, that's a lot closer. Okay, but I think you guys are starting to get the point. Okay, so kind of combine some of those techniques. You could kind of soften the edge of that shadow to more closely relate to these shadows. So you notice how that edge is kind of a gradient of a shadow. It doesn't have that real crisp line. Okay, and then of course you could adjust the color of the girl. So I could click on the person, edit, or image, sorry, layer, new adjustment layer, hue and saturation. I can turn down the saturation a little bit so that it kind of matches the kind of muted background. Okay, our background's fairly gray. So I'd say that is probably a lot nicer. Okay? So you could dodge and burn her a little bit to get the shadows to be a little bit more dramatic, and that would look pretty good. Okay? Any questions about that? Good? All right. So we're going to do one more, and then we'll let you guys take a break, and then we will be in lab. All right? So those are the two urban scenes. So next we're going to do a rural scene. This is going to be a little bit more complicated because we're going to encounter something called grass and plants. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and open up that scene. Open, and let's go to background images, and let's pick. I'm going to pick this Yosemite Valley 2 scene. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to open. All right, so I'll let you guys kind of analyze the shadows yourself a little bit right now. I'm not going to go through that process again. All right, but I'm going to go to File, Place, and I'm going to pick a person. Maybe I'm going to pick, let's see what I got in my, let's pick the guy running, just because as much as I like this gal here, she has a nice pretty dress on, but I don't think we would see her walking around in a field in Yosemite wearing a nice dress. So that's another thing to keep in mind is when you're placing a person in a scene, does the person fit the scene? Don't, if it looks like a hot sunny day and it's a beach, don't place a person with a parka walking down the beach. Okay, so that's another giveaway of whether or not that's real. So this guy, we might actually see this guy running out there. Okay, I think that's fair to say. So let's analyze his shadows a little bit. We have some, looks like we have pretty dramatic shadows in the scene. I'd say that this probably actually wants to be mirrored. Okay, so I'm going to place him, and I'm actually going to have him running the other way. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Flip Horizontal. Actually, maybe the other way was a little bit more correct. Yeah, actually, I'm going to leave it the way that it was. I could see that. What do you guys think? He's fairly neutral. It looks like the back of him is actually a little darker. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it the way that it was. Okay, so I'm going to place him in that scene. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the scale of him fairly quickly. I'm going to say he's going to be about that size. Okay, I'm going to place him kind of out here and not on the jogging path, just so that we can kind of encounter a problem that you're likely to encounter when doing this. Okay, and that's how to deal with the grass. Okay, and what we're going to learn what tool we're going to learn to fix this is the clone stamp tool. Okay, what the clone stamp tool does is it allows you to select a portion of the image and replicate that and duplicate it. Okay, and so what we're going to use that for is to mimic the grass. Okay, so let's go through that process. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and place my guy. He looks a little, let me get him the right scale. Actually going to place him here out in my, okay, I'm going to say that's about right. Okay, so let's place his shadow. So file place, there he is running. Let's go ahead and adjust the size of him. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and place that. I'm going to do Control T for transform. Holding down Control, I'll go ahead and place that shadow about where it should be. Looks like we have fairly dramatic shadows in our scene. Okay, let's say that's about right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit place. I'm going to move that shadow below the guy so that the shadow is actually below his feet. Okay, and then what are we going to do next to make the shadow look a little bit more realistic? Anybody? Look at the color right now. It's very gray and it's not transparent. How are we going to fix that? What was that? Multiply. Yeah, we're going to change the blending mode to multiply. All right, so that actually allows you to be able to see the grass that's beneath it. But we still have a fairly large problem. He looks like he's floating, and the shadow wouldn't just float on top of the grass. If you look at the shadows in the background, there's a really nice gradient to it, and it doesn't look really anything like what we see here in our scene. Okay, so let's look at a couple things that we could do to fix that. I'm going to go ahead and hide. Actually, the first step, I'm going to select the background. I'm going to unlock it. Okay, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use my rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to copy a portion of the grass around the guy's feet. Okay, see what I've done there? All right, and I'm going to do Control C, which is copy, and then Control V, which is paste. Okay, notice that it created a layer 1. That layer 1 has a copy of what it is that I just selected. So if I turn everything off, you'll notice that I just have a copy of that little selection that I just created. Okay, so actually I'm going to leave everything off from there. All right, and I'm going to turn the guy back on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the background of behind the guy's legs. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to select the man running. I'm going to use my magic wand tool, so I'm going to change the quick selection to magic wand, and I'm going to select outside of the guy's body. Okay, notice that it highlighted everything around him. Okay, so he is currently selected, and then from there I'm going to click back on layer 1. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the delete button. Whoops, didn't do that correct. Actually, before I hit the delete button, let me go back to my man. Actually, I need to go over to, sorry, one sec. Select, I'm gonna go to inverse. Okay, so now you'll notice that if I zoom way back, I have just the man selected this time. If I actually go back to where I just was, you couldn't see this before, but notice that it actually has the entire border selected as well. So if I go over to select inverse, now if I select my layer 1 and I hit delete, okay, you don't notice it, you don't notice anything yet, but if I go and move that man, you'll notice that we deleted the outer edges of his body. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and leave that there for now. All right, so from here I'm going to go back onto layer 1 and we're going to start to use the clone stamp tool. All right, So we're going to go over to the clone stamp tool. It's going to be this button right here. It looks just like a stamp. All right. And what we're going to do, we're going to go over to our brushes. And you guys are kind of familiar with these probably top 6 right now. We're going to scroll down to the bottom, and we're actually going to pick on stamp number 134. That's the grass clone stamp. Okay. So what it's going to do is it's actually going to create blades of grass that mimic what it is that you select. Okay. So I'm going to click on 134. Okay. And I'm going to hold down Alt. When I hold down Alt, you're going to notice these little, what looks like kind of like the eyes of like a scope. All right, if you're looking through a scope. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on grass that surrounds it. Okay. So what I'm doing is I'm telling Photoshop what I want that grass to mimic. And what that tool is doing is it's actually picking up the color palette from that object that you just selected. So if I start to draw around the guy's feet, you'll notice that it starts to draw grass from the area that I just selected. Okay. Right now that grass is actually way too big, so I'm going to go up and I'm going to change the size of that grass to a little bit more closely relate to the person. Okay. And you'll notice that I'm going to start to draw some grass around the toes of the person. All right. So I'm going to draw that grass about right here and around the edges of his feet. So you guys don't notice anything yet, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the guy that that we just brought into the scene, and I'm going to bring it below layer 1. Okay, now notice that that grass that we just placed in our scene is now kind of hidden behind the grass that we just created. Okay, so again, I'm going to go over to my clone stamp tool with layer 1 selected. I'm going to click on maybe a little bit of the lighter grass. All right, that looks a little bit, that actually looks a lot better. That looks a lot closer than the grass that I previously had. Okay, and I'm going to cover up his feet. So now if we kind of step back a little bit, you'll notice that his feet now look more rooted into the grass. Okay, we all see how that works? Yes, it'll be hard to remember all these steps the first time. Luckily, I'll upload this video and I'll walk around and help you guys here in a few minutes. All right, so I'm going to turn back layer 0, and I'd say his feet now look a lot more rooted into the grass. All right, so let's turn the shadow layer back on, and let's begin to edit it so that it looks a little bit something like what we see here in the background. Okay, to do that, I'm going to turn off all of the other layers but the shadow layer. Okay, whoops. Okay, so all we have is this. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is, again, we're going to use the clone stamp tool. And as I mentioned earlier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the clone stamp tool. I'm going to use the same size as this, but instead of selecting the color from the grass, I'm going to select the color of the shadow. Okay, and what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to kind of not make the edge of that shadow so rigid. Okay, so I'm going to click on that clone stamp, and I'm going to hold down, oh, before I do that, I got to make sure I click on my shadow layer, and I'm also going to rasterize that layer as well. Okay, so I'm going to hold down Alt, I'm going to select that shadow, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to start to feather that edge. And as I'm doing that, I don't know if you guys can see that. Can you guys see that little X just below my just below the little piece of blade of grass? What that little X is, that's where the clone stamp is actually drawing the color from. Okay, so as I move my mouse around, that little X is also moving around. Okay, if I move my clone stamp up here, notice that it stops drawing it. Okay, the reason why is because that little X, there's no color behind it. It can't select it. So if you're having trouble getting that little X to stay in your shadow, what I would do is create your own little box of color. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a box of color. Use my brush. Let's make my brush size a lot bigger. I'm going to hold down Alt, select that color. Make sure my opacity is not 100, or make sure it's 100%. Okay, I'm going to fill in that box. Okay, deselect, and now if I go back to my clone stamp tool and I select from like the middle of this box, it will always pull the color from that much larger piece of canvas. The shadow can be kind of difficult because it's such a kind of tiny little sliver of color. Okay, so I'm going to continue to add that to the back side of my shadow, like so. Don't worry about if you kind of cross over with the front, not a big deal. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and add that to the back of the shadow. Okay, so not the fronts. Make this a little bit smaller. Okay, see right now it's not working. It's because it's trying to pull color from down here. So I'm just going to hold down Alt, select the color again, and now it's going to start to work. Okay, because it's pulling from the color from that gray box that we just created. Okay, do the same thing to the back of his leg. Okay, say that looks pretty good. Okay, so let's get rid of this box. I'm just going to select it, and I'm going to hit delete. That is now gone. I'm actually going to do the same thing. I'm going to create a box, but I'm actually going to fill it in with white this time. Okay, so when we apply a multiply blending layer to that dark color, do we all remember what happens to white? Whites become what? Transparent. Yeah, transparent. So I'm going to go ahead and fill this in with white. All right, so I'm just going to double click on that. Let's pick white. Okay. And I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to select my brush tool. Let's fill that in. Just give myself a little block of color. Okay, deselect. I'm going to go back to my clone stamp tool. Go ahead and select the white color, and I'm going to go over and I'm going to apply that white to the front of my shadow, like so. This is probably the most advanced technique that you'll learn in here. This is a pretty cool one that you'll be able to do in the future. This will really come into handy when we're doing our renderings later. It just allows you to really make a person blend into a scene really well. Okay, so I'm going to do that to the front of this shadow. Okay, that's good enough. All right, maybe a little bit more. Okay. So now we have that. So I'm going to go back, select my selection tool. I'm going to select the rectangle, delete it, Control D to deselect that, or to get rid of the selection. And then from there, I'm going to turn everything that I have back on. Notice that when I turn everything back on, the multiply blending mode activated again. And now that all that white that we just created became transparent. And that allows for that really soft edge on that shadow. Okay, so now it actually looks like the grass in front of the shadow is actually playing a really nice effect. Okay, and so from there, shadow is actually kind of at the wrong angle, but I could still fix that a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. That looks pretty good. I can start to, I can continue to adjust the color of the shadow if needed, adjust the transparency if needed. Okay, as if I look at the shadows at about in this area, they're actually a little bit lighter. So maybe they're about like that, 70%. Okay, so and that's about it. So he actually looks really nicely rooted into that scene. Okay, any questions? Any questions at all before we move on? Okay, so that's it. We'll go ahead and stop there. Let's take a break. Let's come back at 7:55. All right, and you guys can keep working. We have about an hour and a half left of class. Get that pizza.
Does the inside of a ray
Teresa's too nice. What?
Does the inside